So Susan, I just noticed, said that she's looking for a code. Do you, I do have this code is the check-in code is happy. Susan, is that the one you were looking for? There's a, okay, good, okay. So, so you'll check in with that code, and at the end of my presentation, there will be another code for you. So again, if you guys could keep me honest here with the chat, because I may forget to look over at that screen. So welcome to NetSuite 101, back to basics. So we try to do this one every other year. It's essentially targeted to people who are newer to NetSuite, who just want a high-level overview and a way to look at that and get their arms around kind of navigation and how to move around in it. So it is being recorded, and we'll post that recording later. So if you have to hop off or something, now of course the CPE won't work if you hop off. But all right, here's our agenda for today. There's a lot to get through. It sort of bounces all over NetSuite. I have a tendency to get extemporaneous and move different places, but we will send out this deck after so that you have some of these notes, because I did, in some cases, I put more on the slide, and then I'm going to be demonstrating in NetSuite. So I'm going to hop off the slides as I go. So I don't want you to worry about taking notes. You'll get a copy of this later. So we'll just get right into it. General navigation. So I'm going to flip right over to NetSuite here, and we're going to go into the dashboard to talk about general navigation. So when you first log into NetSuite, depending on your role, you'll see a screen that has a dashboard. And I'll say right off, I'm in right now as an administrator, and this is the nonprofit that I work with, and so I am using a live data just because sometimes the test data environments are ugly, and I also don't know them as well as this one. So because I'm an administrator, I'm in what they call the classic center. There's different centers based on different roles. And the center that you're in your role drives your menu options across the top. And so if you're looking at your screen as a user and you notice someone else's screen looks significantly different than yours, it's because they're in a different center. You can always change back to this classic center, and I'll show you how to do that when we get into the preferences. But that's why I see activities transaction lists across the top. Of course, if you have some suite apps loaded, you might see some different tabs across the top, some bundles loaded, some things where they've added to your options. But for the most part, your role dictates what you see in each of these drop downs and what your menu looks like. I'm going to start out with shortcuts as on your dashboard. And in just to start out, I guess I should say, these are portlets in your dashboard that you can move around, and you can put them in an order that makes your life easier. I think the whole idea of the dashboard is to create an environment to make you as successful as possible and make your work flow from the dashboard. That's what I like to recommend, that this drives your work. So make sure you put this in an order and add reports that that make it clear what you need to get done during a day. It's a great tool. These shortcuts are dictated by what you add as a shortcut. So if you're somewhere in, let's say, I'm trying to think of it. So you can see enter new donation. That's like enter a cash sale. So when I was in this screen at some point, I said that I wanted to add it as a shortcut. So you come up here when you're in the screen you want to use, and you say add to shortcuts. And when you do that, you can give it whatever name you want, and then you can check a box to say, do you want to open it in a new window when you select that shortcut. Some things make sense to open in a new window, others don't. So you'll want to watch that. But now when I go back to my home screen, I see that it's part of my shortcuts. And I also see it here. So you don't always have to go back to your home screen to get to your shortcuts. You can just click on them here. And so I have quite a long list in this role. I'm not sure that you need this many. It just happens that I kept building on to the shortcuts. When you want to change your shortcuts, you can come in here and hit setup. And by hitting setup, you can then change the order of them. And also, oh, Andrea, you have a how do I remove? Here's how you do it. If you just uncheck a box and say, I don't want that shortcut, then it won't show up. And you can also then decide too if you want to put it in a new window. And so just by saving that, one note on all of these portlets is that you do want to, or you do have to update them, refresh them. Where's my refresh? Like on this one, oh, this one you have to refresh your reminders. This one we don't have to refresh, but these are not automatically changed. So I'll look at reminders later, but this is the refresh button on, it's going to update the portlet for you and update the data behind it. It doesn't automatically happen. But each of these portlets has a setup or a remove button. So if you decide I don't want that one anymore, like sometimes I'll move the new release one down to the bottom, or I'll remove it for a while. I think that one, I believe, pops up automatically once they have new release information. But so you want to put your portlets in an order that makes sense. You can personalize this by clicking on here. And you can add, this is your standard content that you can add to your dashboard. You can have a link to something else. Let's say you want to have the CNN feed coming in here. You can add that. You can also have the Suite apps. If you had loaded some Suite apps, this is where they would show up, and you can add them. And then this is the currently used, which shows you what you currently have on your dashboard. The quick add is a way to quickly add different types of entities or transactions. So you can set that up and say, I want a quick add for a vendor on my dashboard. So then you could come in here, and that it's just a way to make that easier. So again, think about your job and think about what you have to do in a day, and then change your dashboard appropriately. You can also change the layout. You can make it a narrow and a wide column, as I have here, or you can switch it, or you can have two narrows in the middle or just one large. So those are ways to make it more usable for you. Recent records is a really powerful tool if you want to get back to something that you were looking at and not use your global search. So don't forget about this little drop down. I find it really helpful. There's also a recent record portlet. I'm not sure if I have that one. Yeah, right here. If you'd prefer to have that up at the top of your screen so that you can easily click into what your recent records were, you could put it up here, or you can just hover here and see your recent records. I find that really helpful when I'm working. All right, so that's the general navigation on this screen as far as recent records, shortcuts, your dashboard, moving your portlets around, and then adding new ones, personalizing it. Oh, and this, I didn't say this, the date settings. If you've got KPIs based on dates, you can change them all at once so that you're viewing them. You're updating it to say, I want to see this month or last year. I've got a KPI down here that would change the settings for that. So KPIs, by the way, you can set them up. They have built-in ones, NetSuite does, that they'll give you. But you can also create your own where you're doing comparisons and you're comparing, and then you can tell, is this a good or a bad change, what you're doing. This is a quick view of donations for this nonprofit. You can see we're getting hit pretty hard with COVID, but these are useful. If this information drives your work and what you need to focus on, then you can put reports like this right onto your dashboard, and you can change what it looks like to what type of graph it is, whatever is meaningful to you for this KPI or this report. You can also do meters. And these are basically adjusted based on one answer. So you're always looking at one answer, and then you can say, so you write a saved search that comes up with $1 amount, and you can set that up as a KPI meter. So, and then you can set when your bank balance should be red versus green versus yellow. These are often good for if you've got executives who log in and they just want to see a picture of their business health, if you add these meters. All right, so any questions on, oh, I see. Thank you, Corey, for answering that. It looked like there's a question about the recent records link. If you click on the link, on this link, all recent records, yeah, so you can get more. And you're only seeing a few on this one, and I'm going to get into this preference in a minute because I've got a preference set that limits my list view. I wanted to show you that. So I want to talk about reminders because I think these are one of the most powerful things. Actually, I want to make sure that I'm going to flip forward here. Okay, reminders. They're a powerful way to set yourself up for success, because if you know exactly what you have to get done in a day and you've set your reminders up to help you track that, you're going to focus on what you need to focus on. So you can create searches that tell you when you're required to act. When entities or transactions enter a given state, they'll show up on your dashboard. So you can set up reminders and alerts that tell you when things happen that require your attention. So I think it's conceivable that someone's entire job could be driven by reminders. You could set everything up around these reminders. They're also a great tool for keeping data clean. If you want to be reminded, if you don't have a workflow in place that gives someone a warning when they do something data-wise that's not good, you could also just have a reminder that shows you these entity records possibly have some bad data in them. And then also for tasks that you put on, if they're due or overdue. And then you can put headline reminders with colors to highlight what needs to be done. So let's look at what reminders I have here. I only set up one of them as a highlight. When you come into this high-level setup, you're able to say which ones are headlines just by dragging them into this headline option. So I could drag any of these up top and make them a headline. If I click on the X, I'm taking them off my reminder. And down here, it's important to note that you show reminders with 0 results. I like to do that because I like to be reminded of what reminders I have. And so then I know, oh yeah, these are all good. And I don't know, it's motivating to me when I have green ones that say 0. So maybe you're not motivated by that, but I am. So I put them on here. So in this case, this is a highlighted one. It just makes it bigger, but it shows that there's some donations that need director acknowledgement. Now, I'm gonna click on one later to show you what happens. But you can see here that we don't have any uncategorized ones right now, no deposits to refund. I do have 10 trip expenses. This is a data cleanup one where we use Expensify, people enter expenses there and then they send them in and then they hit our books. But we have a whole section of trip expenses that need to have a trip assigned to them. These are motorcycle rides for veterans. And so we like to know our expenses, which trip it was on. So because this is on my to-do list, when I click on that 10, it takes me right to the 10 that are a problem. I can use my control key and click edit, 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 and it'll open them all the way across the top. I can go fix them, save them, close them, and then when I come back to my dashboard, oh, sorry, I went to the wrong one. I'm gonna go back to my dashboard. Then it's still gonna show 10 here until I hit this refresh, and then I'll see that number drop down. I also put some rules on here to say this is red. You can do this on each one of these, where you can say, I want it to be red if it's greater than 0, and green if it's greater than 0. I'm sorry, greater than 1 up here, greater than or equal to 1. So it's going to look for 0 is going to give me a green, and then anything above 1 is going to give me red. You can also add different colors and different amounts. So I think this is visually helpful for when you're looking at your list of reminders to know just automatically which ones are in good shape and which ones you need to work on. You can also, in that, you can also set that to be a highlighted reminder. So I hope that as a takeaway from this, you can think about your work and think about which items in your job you might want to consider turning into a reminder. I should say it's the saved search when you're running a saved search. So I'm going to look at a search for uncategorized transactions. This is the search that drives that reminder. And if I edit that search, I'll show you. It's right here that you click on that to say that it's available for reminders. Okay, that's what gives you, and it essentially, it means anything that this saved search brings up will be on that number. Like I have 8 donations that need to be acknowledged. That's the number that it's going to bring up. So you can't use this if things don't fall off the list when you fix them. So in some cases, I'll create a checkbox that says, yep, I did this, and you check the box and then it goes away. Usually you can just have the saved search look for certain activity and drop it. But you can also just create a quick checkbox that someone checks to say, yep, I did my job on this, and then it goes off the list. This is also where you can make a saved search available as a dashboard view, by the way. If you check that box, then it'll show up and you can make it one of your portlet answers. So these are important checkboxes on your saved searches. Any questions? I'm looking in the I'm looking at your chat box. I don't see anything right now for reminders. So I will keep going. Set preferences. Right here under your dashboard home icon, there's a set preferences. When we get into setting preferences, there's all these options across the top. And so I'm just going to walk you through some of the more interesting ones. If anybody has a favorite that it was like an aha moment when they found it, please go ahead. Mike just asked a good question. Is there a way to set up a reminder for someone else or for an entire role? You can publish a dashboard, and I believe that would also publish all the reminders on that dashboard. So I can't say when I'm doing a saved search, I can't say, oh, and I want to create this as a reminder for this person, like save search by save search. But I can set up a portlet, I can set up an entire dashboard. Let me go back to the dashboard. And I could set up all the shortcuts and reminders on a dashboard. And then I could come down here and publish my dashboard. And if I publish that dashboard, when I do, it'll give all of those to the person I publish it to. And as a reminder, when you publish dashboards, you can only publish them in the same center. So they have to be in, so if it's an accounting center user, whoever's creating the dashboard needs to create it in a role that's an accounting center role, and then they can publish. And when they publish it, I'll go ahead and show you this while we're here. You can lock your shortcuts so that no one can add to them. and then you can apply this dashboard to specific roles, and then you can also apply it to tabs. And I usually, the home tab is the one that we were just looking at, but keep in mind that there's a dashboard for every one of these options across the top. Each one of them has a dashboard, and you can fill those dashboards up if you want to, and then that's how you could publish those. Any other questions on that before I move on? Thanks for the question, Mike. All right, so I'm going to go back to set preferences. And like I said, if you have a favorite, if you want to pop it into the chat as we go along, or if I say something and you think, no, that's not how that works, because occasionally I can be wrong. And so, so the general ones are just basically about you. You can come in here and put in your from email address. And this would change if, let's say, your login address is one thing, but you want your from email address to be something else. You can go ahead and enter that here. You can put some HTML in here to have a whole signature line under your signature on your email, which is always helpful. You can select your language, time zone. You know, these are just things that make it easier for you to read. Your formatting, month, day, the way you want your numbers formatted. I thought this one was interesting. I found this one today. Auto place decimal. So if you're someone who does a lot of data entry and you don't like to hit the decimal and then the 2 zeros, or you just want to key in your numbers, always assuming a 2-place decimal, you can actually auto place that decimal and never type the decimal. I would never do that because then I would forget to add the zeros, but if you're doing a lot of data entry, for some people, that makes their data entry faster. And that's really what a lot of this is about, is what's going to make you more efficient in your job. I noticed this phone number format one too, where you can say that you like your phone number. I'm going to click on here if you want it to automatically come in this way as you enter it, which I thought was interesting. The problem is if you're using phone numbers outside the US, that might not be, it says to leave this preference blank because it needs that plus the country code. One note on this, there are general preferences that we set up at the company level. And if your administrator sets some of these things up and then comes down here and says overriding preferences, you can actually not allow overrides. So they can control some of these to say the first day of the week is always going to be what we set it as a company. So they could uncheck this allow override, which would mean that nobody could change that preference. So if you're in your preferences and you notice you can't change something, it's because someone was out here and they said, I don't want to allow an override. Or if you're an administrator and you don't want your people to be able to do that, this is where you come in and check that. Again, that was under setup company, the general preferences down here. All right, I'm going to come back and I'm back in the set preferences. Back up to this side. I always check the show internal IDs because I find that really helpful. That means anytime I'm running a report, it's going to show them to me. It also shows the internal IDs of a field. When you're looking at the label help, like if I click on this right here, do you see how it's got this field ID? That shows up because I have this show internal IDs selected. So I find that that's a really helpful box to check.
Dana, can you show that
yeah.
again? That
Yep.
it didn't, like, it flashed really quickly.
Oh, you know what? I'm
delay.
seeing that in the screen that it takes it a minute, and I apologize.
That's all right.
So
yeah,
right
that's better.
here, it's got a field ID. When I clicked on the label, the field label help, it gave me a field ID, and it says expose IDs. That's the name of that field, and sometimes that's helpful for when you're running a report or something and you want to know what the field is called. You won't get that if you don't show the internal IDs. And then when I'm running reports now, it's going to show the internal ID on every save search I do. It's going to show up. These are interesting. I apologize for my dog. These are interesting options. It's if you're looking at a list, if you check the only show last sub account, you know how if you have a hierarchy on your accounts, it's only going to show the bottom level. It's only going to show the bottom level account. Same with entities. If you've got a customer with a child customer, when it's only going to show you the child when you're looking at the drop down, so then you don't get that colon, you know, parent colon child. Same with sub items. So this is a preference, you know, how you like to look at them. And then if you, Mike just brought up a good point that the field ID that we're showing up here in the show internal IDs is really helpful for the CSV imports and updates. It is because that is the best way for you to update using an import with an internal ID, because then you know that you're not gonna, the mapping won't be messed up. So you can see his comment on that. Let's see, you can, okay, this is the one I was talking about. Remember when I clicked on this reminder and I only saw 10? It's because I changed this number of rows in list segments to 10. I don't typically have it set at 10. I usually have it closer to 100 because I like to see a lot. Like if I'm going to a list of customers, lists, relationships, actually I'll do vendors. And by the way, I right-clicked and said open in a new tab because, and so now do you see how I have 719 and now it's gonna show me, well, it's not showing 100 at a time, is it? Oh, it's because I haven't logged back. I just changed that option without saving it. So I'll show you in a minute once I save this how it works. Same with the maximum entries and dropdowns. I've had clients ask about this before, where when you're in entering even like an account on a transaction, and it's basically, it's telling you when is it going to flip from the drop down list to the pop-up list, so that, because some people prefer the pop-up list because they can go do their search and that easier, or is it going to be a drop down where they're selecting from a list? And so I've seen this one also go to a very high number or a very low number if people prefer the pop-up. I'll change it to 5 for now and we'll see what that does. And then this gets into some of the type ahead when you're doing a search. Is it going to try to fill it in for you or not? And is it require an exact match? So if I'm typing in, say, an account name, and I start typing is it going to show me all those that match as we go along? Or is it going to wait until it finds the exact match to show? I recommend that you play around with these checkboxes, uncheck one of them and work for a day and see if you like it better, then come back and check it again. I'm making sure I've gotten, okay, so that's the general ones. I'm gonna save because I made that one change. And now if I go to my vendor list again, let's see if it's I'm gonna refresh that list. Yeah, so now it's showing me 100 at a time. Do you see that? Before I had lots of pages. Now I only have 8 pages because I have 719. So it definitely changes how you do your work if you change that list number. I'm going to go back here to set preferences. All right, then we get into appearance. And so this is where you can change your color theme. I have generally always kept mine in the standard that they display, but there's lots of schools if you have a school that you like and you want to show school spirit. Now I do use this a lot for my sandbox accounts. So if I'm in a sandbox, I want to know that with a visual reminder with the color scheme. So I changed my color theme to something very different for my sandbox so that it changes this blue bar to green or something like that. So then when I open it, I remember, okay, your brain pays attention to that stuff and it knows that it's in the sandbox. You You can also do it by role because these preferences are by role. So I'm in as an administrator right now, but let's say I had another role that I worked in too. You could make that role different, and then you would know that you're working in a different role. Some basic things on charts, what, you know, to say what you like best on your screen fonts. The landing page, if you wanted it to have a different page that you came to when you started your work for the day, you could change your landing page here. I thought this was an interesting one. I've never set this one, but you can set the customer dashboard as the default view on the customer record. So if you're say the AR worker, this might be really helpful because then every time you pull up a customer, you're going to go straight to their dashboard. And I think that could be really helpful. Let's see, anything else on here? This would just be optimal color contrast to make it easier to read. All right, let's get through I'm going to go straight to analytics here. This is a really important one, report by period. As you know, in NetSuite, there's a date field and a period field. And the reason for that is you can, typically you run financial reports by period, but let's say I put in a rent payment on the end, at the end of March, but it's really for my April rent. I can date the vendor bill in March, put the date on as March, so that, Cheryl, I don't know of a way to copy all preferences between roles. If someone else knows of a way, please put it in the chat. So if so I could put my vendor bill in at the end of March. I could say March 25th is the date of this bill, so that my, you know, net 30, that my due date properly calculates, but I want it to show up in the counting period of April. So I could put in a March date with an April period. Now, let's say you have two people working in your accounting department and one has their report by period set to never and one has all. When they both run an income statement and they see the rent, one of them's going to see that rent in March and one of them's going to see it in April. And so I've had people complain about NetSuite's broken, we're seeing different reports. Make sure that you understand this report by period and that the people that you're working with, that you all have it set the same, and so that you understand the implications. So you can say financials only, or all reports, or never. The one time I come in here and change this frequently is if I want to validate my AP aging, for example. I've run an AP aging report and it gives me a balance. And then I go to my balance sheet and it's different. I switch my balance sheet to be I switch here to say report by period never, and then I go run my balance sheet again, and now it ties. And the reason is because some of my bills may have had a date that was different, and the AP aging is always run by date. So that's an important one. You can put in a default bank account here so that one always shows up. So some of these search ones show list when only one result. You know how when you come in here and you search and you say, I want to find something, and it only has one answer. So it pops up that that entity. Well, if you want it to prefer it to show it in a list just as a one, you can check this box. I'm gonna keep going here. I want to make sure I'm on track time-wise. I think we're okay. All right. Include inactives in global and quick search is important. If you do want to see those, then you can come out here. There's another way I'll show you in a minute to say for just this one search, I want to see inactives. But if you always want to see inactives, you have to check this box. It can be really frustrating for someone if they thought they were looking at inactives and they couldn't see it. I'm gonna quick see if there's more. Your PDF orientation for reports, you can set up a standard for that here. This KPI one, I had no idea that one was there, but it talks about which month to use for your consolidation rates. So sometimes they're pretty buried in here, but they're important. I'm not going to look at all of these. The restrict view one, though, is interesting, where you can say for right now, I want to only see one subsidiary. So if you, let's say for a day, you're trying to work in one specific subsidiary, you could actually restrict your view. There's also a way to do that from the dashboard, but this is another way. So you can come in. Now you have to come in and unrestrict your view if you want to go back and do it another way. Any questions on the set preferences? Did I miss any that people think are fantastic that we should be talking about? I'm looking at some of these other ones. If you're using activities, you can do things here for your calendar. Can you cover alerts? Okay, let's go look at that. So this is where you can set the alerts if you don't want to get them all at once. And I've never set this for myself. So Mike, if you have and you want to unmute and talk about it, basically you can stop from getting so many all the time. You can say, I really want to get these up to 3 times a day. So that you don't get them all day long trickling in. And so you can set your times on when you want to get this. Is there something else, Mike, on that?
It's basically going to, whatever's on your primary dashboard, it's going to send you an email with that information. And so you can determine when you want those emails to come in. And if your information on your home dashboard is rolled up, it won't show, it'll email you like nothing. But if everything is expanded, then it'll email you like all of the information that's on your dashboard.
Huh, I had that completely wrong, didn't I? So,
no, not necessarily, but I mean, it doesn't tell you exactly what it does, but that's the purpose.
Okay. Okay, so it'll actually send you your dashboard.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm gonna have to try that. I haven't done that. Well, and I did see that Jamie asked, they're seconding the question on whether to push preferences to other roles. I think there's, let's see, the show customer as a default across roles, but only see the ability to set it for myself. I think show customer as, you want to push that to other roles, to other people, Jamie? I wonder if that's a global preference. I'm going to go back into setup company general preferences and look to see if it could be set up here. I'm looking for a checkbox, that's why I'm going kind of fast. I don't see it. Yeah, maybe let's have that one. I know some of you know NetSuite well enough that a lot of what I'm doing is a review. If you wanted to look at that and report back to us when we get to the open forum. So the question is, can we move some of these, make them global, that we can, in this case, they wanted to push the show customer dashboard as a default across roles, but Jamie can only see it for themselves. So, okay. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is global search. I'm going to come back to my, let's see. This is all, so you can see I just made some notes on what we were going to go over, but for future reference. But this one has a little more detail in the slides, so I'll go ahead and show the slides first. And so the global search is really powerful so that you don't always have to go to your menu and find the list and then look up the one you want to look on the list. So I would highly recommend that you get proficient at using the global search, which is at the top of your screen. If you do an Alt-G, it'll move your cursor right to that field. So I know lots of times, if you're like me, you want to keep your hand on the keyboard and not always go to the mouse. And NetSuite is a little bit mouse-centric in my view, but in this case, you can do that and get to the global search field. So there's prefixes for NetSuite where if you do a prefix and then put a colon or a caret after it, you'll be able to limit your search to only that type of record. And so you noticed earlier I typed in SEA : to find a search. You can do CUS, or there's lots of them, and I'll show you. These are some prefixes that are out there. Now I did validate because I thought that it was going to use the standard name of a record. So for example, customer is the standard, but in my environment, I changed it to constituent because it's a nonprofit environment. And I did notice that it's the, it does not, I'll show you, it doesn't notice. So if I say CUS, I'll just do Dana. I think I'm in there. Nope. But if I do constituent, now I see them, and I see contacts and constituents because they both start with CON. Now I could do that, and it would now limit it to just constituents. Okay, so so it's an important, I think, a nice shortcut, because often you're going to see a whole lot when you go ahead. If you just type in a few letters, you're going to see a lot. I pulled this, by the way, I want to give Paul Clark credit for my daily. He wrote up a funny global search kind of a cheat sheet, and we have it in the Rocky Mountain NetSuite user group files if you want it, but he wrote this up, and so I stole it from him from a previous user group presentation. So wildcards, you can do an underscore or a percentage. The underscore will match a single character, where the percentage will match a string of any length. And so it can be really helpful if you don't know entirely what you're looking for, but you know part of it, or you don't know how something is spelled, you can change your search appropriately. Right. Multiple text strings, you can use an uppercase "or" as a separator between keywords to search for multiple. So you could say max or max, and you're going to get both of them, which I think is really helpful, especially if you don't know. But it has to be a capitalized, both of them. So don't, if you do it not capped, it's not going to know what you're doing. Here's the one I talked about before. If you append a plus sign to the end of your search, it's going to show you inactive records too. So if you don't want to see them all the time, you can leave that checkbox on the preferences unchecked, but then you can come out here and do it this way. Also, oh, and this was that by default, a single record returned by a global search opens in view mode, but you can actually override this to have it open in edit mode if you capitalize the first search of the prefix. Now that sounds like, why would you ever do that? But if your job is to constantly edit, let's say customer records or vendor records, and if you use your search, you don't have to click on it and see edit. You can just do a cap, and then when you click on it to open it, it'll open in edit mode. Of course, you can also do that by, if you hover over here, you can get to the edit or the dashboard as well. But if you don't want to get your fingers off the keyboard, you could type in the whole thing then, and I'll say, if I say Tom Larson here, and see how it came up with, well, it came up with a few, so that's not going to be a good example. But if it had only come up with one and I hit enter, it would have come up in edit mode. So that's just a quick shortcut for how to do that. All right, we're getting on to the helps. Or any questions actually on the search. Does anybody else use anything in their global search that they find super helpful that they want to post in the chat? Okay. All right. I don't see anything. If you think of them later, I think that's what this user group is really good at, is sharing those aha moments. Use SE as a prefix to search for safe searches. Yep, that's a good one. I did SEA because I'm usually doing a 3-letter one, but you're right, SE is the only one you need. And now I'm looking at Mike said, when you write help documentation for your users, instead of writing setup, blah, 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 just write global search text. Oh, right. So if you well, Mike, why don't you unmute for a second? And
yeah, I'll unmute, Dana. So, one thing with users is that depending on their role, which will determine your center, the menu bar, the menu up top looks different. So I've seen a lot of people where when they write documentation of like how to do things, they'll say, go here, here, and here. But then the users will say, well, I don't see that up there. And, using the global search stuff is a lot more concise. It doesn't matter what the menu bar looks like, you always go to the same place.
yeah.
So in your documentation, if you say go to INV : put in the invoice number, that'll always take you to the invoice. You don't have to go, tell them how to navigate their menu bar.
So because I'm in this center, if I were to write help documentation and I'm telling them how to enter an invoice, I would say go to transactions, sales, create invoice. Well, the problem is they might have a different set of options across the top in a different center. So you could also just say type in page, I think it's just invoice. Or actually I would say type in page create invoices, because then it would take them to the right place without, it doesn't matter what their menu options are, right?
Right. Yep. And another really good example of that is if you need to document how to take a user to a saved search, because there's often a zillion of those.
Yep.
You could just tell them to go to search : blah,
yeah,
and it takes them to the search.
Yep, exactly. So that way, so yes, you're right. That's super helpful for getting them to the right place without caring about what their menu options look like. Thank you. That's exactly what we're looking for here. All right, let's talk about helps and how to get help in NetSuite. The first one I'm going to talk about is the label help. And so you saw it earlier, I clicked on the label of the field and it gives me a help, and you can see I have my internal IDs turned on, so it's showing up here. And this will give information about the help, but what I love that they've recently added is that you can customize the field level help. And so that can be really helpful for end users, because you can now change that field level help and customize it to your business and what you want people to do there. And I think that's been a great addition. And so to do that, just as a, you just hit this customize button, and this is form specific, or it can be form specific. And so that means you can have different field level help on different forms, and we're going to talk about forms in a minute. That one isn't a good example, but okay, another help is the help center. If you click on the help button at the top of your screen, so we'll come up here, it's this help button. This is contextual, so it takes you to set company preferences, because that's where I clicked the help button. But it also on the left side has a table of contents. And so if you like looking at things in less of a wiki kind of way and prefer to see it organized across the left, you can now get to your entire table of contents here. You can also get to user guides here, which I think is really helpful. It'll take you to PDF documents that talk about, that have whole write-ups on different areas, and those are really helpful. It'll also get you to videos this way, where they're organized in these groups. So you can click on these and watch videos. You can also, another way, I'm going to close this because I want to get, and I'm sorry, there's a new release information. You can also then decide, well, I just want to go to Suite Answers and click on Suite Answers. And so this is where you can enter your search words. And I'll have to say, it takes some time to learn how to put your keyword searches in here to get what you want out of it. But it's just a learning experience to say, you know, what you're looking for. I also wanted to point out down here, you can also get to videos and additional resources down here. And when you click on this video option, now you get them, I hope. That's weird. There they are. Okay, if you click down the left, you'll get, these are the groupings of them, and then on the right, you'll see your individual ones. So I usually recommend people watch these videos at the beginning. They're short, and they, so when you're first starting to use NetSuite, they go through individual topics. So these are anywhere from just a couple minutes long. I think the longest ones are 10 or 20 minutes. But you can click then down the left, and when you click on the topic, you get a different set of videos. And so those can be really helpful. So when I was over here and I clicked on help and then I went to Suite Answers, that was one way, but you can also go here and say go to Suite Answers, and that'll take you directly to the Suite Answers screen. One note about this, I'm just gonna, you can see what I've searched before, blanket PO. If I search on that, you get different types of support articles, you get help topics. So look at the little icon to decide which ones you want to drill into. And then of course, when you do drill into one, what's usually helpful are these other answers that people found helpful, because then you can click around, and often in the one that you click in, there's going to be links to other ones where you can get the answers you need. So let's see, one other is you type in up here, again, let's say I was somewhere and I did a Control-G, oops, wow, is it Alt-G? Which one gets me to the, you can tell I never use that. Alt-G, Alt-G gets you to the global search. Then you can type in help and then say blanket PO like I just did, and you can go straight to the search and have it give you search results based on your search. So if for a shortcut way to get to helps. Does anybody have any ideas on getting help in NetSuite that we haven't covered that might be helpful for others?
Yeah, you know, one thing worth mentioning, I don't remember if you mentioned it, but in your normal NetSuite, when like you're in NetSuite in the global search, you can type help : blah.
I just did that.
I'm so sorry. Yes.
Mike, come on, pay attention.
Sorry, I was looking on different.
That's
I'm
all right.
finding a different setting. It's like, oh God, we need that. So sorry.
That's okay. Well, and none of this really that I'm sharing, I'm sure, is new to you, Mike. So, yep, that was one of them. Anybody else have any help tips that they use, that they care about? One thing, I'm watching the chat. So one thing that you may not know about under Setup Company is this billing preferences. I hope I have it turned on here. View billing information. If you ever want to know where you stand with your users, like how many users you bought and how many you're using, you can see here that we've provisioned 8, we're using 5 for this account. It gives you all of these details about how much of the file cabinet you're using, storage size, you can see we're not using very much. So this can be really helpful. It'll also tell you what add-on modules you've purchased, what bundles you've purchased, your provisioning history. I think it can be really helpful. Now this is I'm in as admin, and that's why I can see this. You may not be able to see it in your role, but if you're an admin, I think it's very helpful. Okay. I'm going to go back to the slides. We're going to shift gears a little bit. These are all of the help things that you'll find now. Okay, we're shifting gears. Oh, Paula mentioned that she uses the Help Center weekly updates in the Help Center. If something technical crops up out of nowhere, it can help me troubleshoot. Oh, that's a good, no, I have never used that. So it's in the Help Center, you're saying. Is it right here? Okay, Help Center weekly updates. Very good. So you can read those each week and see what things have come up. That's a good tip. Thank you, Paula. All right, I'm going to go back to my slides, and I wanted to describe, and this is super high level, but in NetSuite you have entities and you have transactions, and sometimes it can be confusing, especially if you're used to another system where they might call a lead really more like an opportunity, right? Where it's a transaction versus an entity. So I thought I'd just cover this at a super high level to share how the language in NetSuite and also the GL impact that it has so that you understand the debits and credits. And this isn't an accounting session. I always do this one in the accounting session, but I think it's helpful for non-accountants to understand what's going on. So when we talk about entities and transactions, I think of entities as sort of like the nouns in the system. They're the physical things, where the transactions are the activities that happen between them. And so you've got in this lead to cash process, if you have inventory, which is like the longest set, right? You've got a lead. When you enter a lead, it's really a precursor to a customer. You met someone on an elevator, you're not sure if you're going to sell them anything, but you want to put their information in the system. So you put them in as a lead, and it's just an entity record. There's no transaction, no debits and credits. Then once you add an opportunity to them or an estimate, which is kind of a precursor to a sales order, they become a prospect. And so the entity changes from lead to prospect. They now have an opportunity attached. There's still no GL impact. And then when you create a sales order, which is turning that opportunity into a sales order, they become a customer. And this happens automatically in NetSuite. You can control it with your statuses. But you're basically saying now they're considered a customer, we have a sales order. A sales order still doesn't have any GL impact. It's only when you fulfill that sales order that you start getting some GL impact. And so then you have your cost of goods sold and your inventory is affected. And then once you invoice it, AR and revenue is affected. And then when you get your payment, undeposited funds and ARR is affected. Then you deposit that and you have bank and undeposited funds. So this just shows how it flows through the system with your debits and credits. And again, you'll get this deck if this is helpful for you later. But I think it's especially interesting to note that there's no GL activity until you get to the fulfillment stage. I just have a few more slides. So without inventory, this shows you the same thing, but it's basically you go straight from sales order to invoice and with no fulfillment. And so then you just have AR and revenue all the way until you do your bank deposit. Okay, and then we have the purchasing side of things. Same thing, except the only entity involved here is a vendor. You have a purchase request with no GL impact, a purchase order with no GL impact. And then once you receive the goods, that's when the impact happens with an inventory transaction. And so then you get inventory received, not billed, and then you bill it and you get AP, and then you get your payment and the cash goes into the bank. Notice this is one little trick right here. If you, the received not billed then needs to be turned into a vendor bill before month end in order for everything to look good. So that you're actually moving that into your AP. This is the same thing without inventory. So essentially you just skip straight to the vendor bill. There's no receipt in this one. And then you have your payment. Oh, good point. Corey points out that anything with the word order in it does not have a GL impact. Sales order, purchase order, work order, transfer order. That's exactly right. So the those are just some to keep in mind. All right, we know you need it. Okay, so now custom forms. You know how I talked about how, the whole idea is to make your job easier, help you focus on what you need to focus on. As administrators and people implementing NetSuite, it's good to think about those forms and guide the data entry and make it as efficient as possible. If someone's job is only to fill in these 10 forms on a transaction, or 10 fields on an entity record or a transaction record, why have 30 that they have to tab through? And so you can create custom forms and make them specific to a role. And you can make it the preferred one, which is, I think, a really good tool. So just to come through the slides here real quickly, most of the time when you're using the forms, especially if you're using it for any type of security, you'll want to hide that form dropdown, and I'll show you that in a minute. So you want to get rid of the extra ones, change the tab and or field order based on the needs of the different roles, so that you can have them see exactly what they should see. And then, NetSuite doesn't have field by field granular security. It doesn't have that option. And so this is a way to create that option. You can hide fields or make them inline so someone can't change them, and so you can actually extend your permissions and roles by using the forms. If you do that, of course, you have to hide the custom form field, and then you can set forms as preferred by a role. So once you're in a form, you can say, I have this custom vendor form, and here's my roles. And now I want to set them, I want to say it's preferred for these roles. And so I'll come back into NetSuite. So let's say I'm going to add a donation, transactions. Oh my gosh, where did it go? It would be under sales, enter donation. Okay, so I'm going to enter this donation. You'll see that I've got a custom form listed here, the donation. I have another one where I've called it income not donations. And so there's a difference on there. This one, you can see that I've got some checkboxes on acknowledgements for the donor, where here it's not a donation, it's just that I need to get income in. And you can see that I created a checkbox that automatically gets checked in my form setup. So if you can customize the form up here. If you have the role that allows you to do this, you can customize the form. Let's just look at what you get here. A little bit slow. The gerbil's running on the little wheel must be hungry for lunch. There we go. So this is where you can name your forms. You can also put say which layout you want the form to go to when you go to print it. An email template can be there. These are very specific to this form. You can assign a logo to this form alone. So if you have a logo that's different based on, let's say, the business unit that you're sending it from, you can set up a different form with a different logo in order to push that logo to your standard forms print. Once you set up a new one, by the way, it's going to automatically check this form as preferred. So be careful when you do that you uncheck that if you really don't want it to be preferred. The first thing you might want to do is, if you've added some custom fields at some point and maybe they landed in the custom tab, you might want to move elements between subtabs. If you click on this, what that allows you to do then is, if something's showing up on a tab, often like the inactive is a good example, that it's showing in that system tab down below. If you want to put it up at the top of the record, you click on that move between, and then now I can go ahead and move things. These are all of my subtabs. Here's a custom one saying which relief ride is it for, was there a campaign. I could check these and say, I want to move this one to a different tab. And so that's how you move them around on the document or on the form. And then once you've moved them, you say apply and save. I'm going to say cancel just to go back here. Now I've got them where I want them on the right tab. Now I can change how the order of them on the tab, how they look. And so this is your tab order. You can change the tab order here. I typically put, when you're looking at an entity record like a customer, I would put their transactions as the first tab because that's the one everyone wants to see first. You might have preferences on a vendor that you show first. So this changes your tab order. And then you get into the field groups. You know how at the top of the screen there's a section for primary and then sales classification. You can change the order of those and say which ones you want to show. They won't show if you don't have anything in them. And so if we go back, if we're looking at the screen fields, I'll show you what I mean. But you can set up those subcategories. Once we're in the screen fields, this is where you can see what will show and what order. And these are your field groups over here. So you can see I don't have any, some of these are in here, like subsidiaries in here. I'm not even, it's just showing at the very end because I didn't assign it to a group, but you can move these around. I won't be able to move something from sales into up in this part unless I change its section. So it keeps the sections whole. So the first thing you would want to do is change the section if you want to move that up. And this is also where you can say how you want it to show. If it's mandatory, what its display type is. If it's a checkbox, you can say whether it's defaulted or not. And so you can see that's where I set that one, income other than donation. I set that up as checked. I could actually then make it disabled so that someone couldn't uncheck it if I felt like that was going to be a problem. And so this is where you can start making things easier for people and also keeping your data cleaner. This column break is where you tell it when at the top, when you saw the information along the top, that it sets a column break to give you, so if you're finding that you're taking up too much real estate on the top of your screen, you can change your column breaks and then also hide fields, or also if you want to get rid of some of these field groups because that whole bar across the screen takes up space. And if you want to get more real estate, you can just put them all in the same group and then you don't get that section that adds more space. So that's, you can move things around there. And then you've got your actions drop down, you know, at the top when you're looking at your actions, you can say whether you want things as a button or in the menu. So notice delete is always in the menu, right? You have to go into more actions and then you say that you want to delete it. If you want that to show up as a button, you just have to change this to button. So you can create these forms to work better for you. If there's something that you do all the time, you can make it easier to work with. Sublists, this is where you get into what's showing up as sublists in all of those tabs. And then you get all the way down to the sublist fields. And this is where you can change on the bottom part of that donation record, you can put the order of the fields and what's required. Here's a little trick. There's that options. I don't know if you've noticed, it always shows up on transactions. If you get rid of the label, it won't show in the column. And so if you see that there's a field that it won't let you uncheck it because it's required, but you really don't want it in the data entry, you just erase the name of it and then it won't show. So again, you can just drag and drop these to move them around and put them in the order that makes for the best data entry. Printing fields, this will say what comes out on. One thing I like about NetSuite is they have one standard transaction form that you can create that can be used for any transaction that you want to print. And then you control the printing fields at the form level. So you can say, for this form, I want to print these fields, and I want them in this order, and maybe this width. You can put the header, footer, body, and columns. And so it's really nice because then you're only dealing with one printing form, one transaction form, but then you can control it at the form level. You can decide what fields you want to print. I think that's really powerful. I'm going to get into this roles section. This is where you can say, I want this to be the preferred form for these two roles. I don't want anyone else to have the preferred one. If this preferred overrides the preferred that's at the form level on the form itself. So it would override if someone other form is checked as preferred, but I came in here and I said these two, this is the form that will pop up. And so if you hide the form drop down on the form and then you make it the preferred one, it's the only one they can get to. Oh, I just remembered, you can actually create a shortcut to a specific form, even then if you don't make it preferred. If you save a shortcut using a particular form and then save that shortcut, it'll actually continue to use that form. What else on here? So I think they're very powerful. They also come into play on your CSV import because they dictate what fields are available when you're doing a CSV import. So make sure when you're doing a CSV import that you select the right form. Or if you're doing one and you don't see a field that you know exists, make sure that you've selected a form that has that field on it. So that's just a little gotcha that happens if your preferred form doesn't have the field that you're trying to import. Any questions on custom forms? Don't see anything in the chat. All right, let's talk about permissions. This is I'm not going to say a fun topic because I think it's kind of a chore, frankly, for anybody to set these up. But let's explain how they work, and then we can talk about maybe some best practices for that. Let me see, I gotta come back here and make sure I talked about it. Yep. All right, so user access in NetSuite is driven by roles. Each role is set up with a specific set of permissions, and those permissions are broken up into lists, transactions, setup, and customization. I think best practice is to have one permission, but it's not uncommon for a user to have more than one. I've seen that quite a bit. And I'll talk in a minute about why I think one permission is better. But it is helpful when someone's on vacation that you can just assign their role to another user, and then that user can do their job while they're gone. And then when they come back, you can take that role away. Specifically, if it's a very different role that that other person does. Let's say they're the one who prints checks and you really want some control over that. You can just give that new user access for that limited period of time and then take it away. So you don't have to actually update their role to give it to them. You just give them a whole new role that it represents what that the vacationing user's role is. And again, you can publish dashboards from one role to another if the role is the same center. Let's see. The reason I said that about one role is Sarbanes-Oxley, one of the requirements is that there's proper separation of duties, and roles allows you to prove that you have proper separation of duties. You may have to document that if you have an audit for separation of duties. And so it's helpful if someone has 5 different roles. You actually have to combine all of the permissions for those roles into one in order for you to see exactly what that person can do to illustrate, to your auditor that they have proper segregation of duties. If they have one role, it's easier because you can just look at their role and say, okay, they can't do what they shouldn't do, like create a vendor and cut a check. That would be not a good separation of duty. And so having one role is helpful. But again, I have seen people where they have two specific roles that someone does. Like today, I'm going to be an AP clerk. Tomorrow, I'm going to do the AR side of it. And so they have two different roles like that. You can compare the roles using the show role differences, and I'll click into that. The good part about that, actually, I'll just click in to show you, but before I do that, I wanted to mention that there's this free bundle called the Custom Administrator role. If you notice, when you're in my roles, if I go to users and roles, and I want to, this is where you manage your roles. This is where you can show your role differences. If I click on this, you're able to select a base role and then compare it to a role. So I can say, I want to compare the AP clerk to the accountant, okay? And I only want to show the differerences. Or if you want to see, oh, sorry, Andrea, I just saw your question about publishing dashboards. You can publish a dashboard to the same role. Let me go back to that note. You can, from one role to another if the role is in the same center. So when you publish dashboards, you're actually publishing them to a role, not to a user. And so that's another reason to create roles that are meaningful from a dashboard standpoint, so that you can say, I'm going to publish this accountant dashboard to all of the people who have the accountant role. I hope that answers your question. So this only show differences will only show the differences between these two roles, but if you uncheck that box, you're going to see the entire list of their permissions. So the category of the permission, and then what each of those roles has. Okay, so I like looking at this because then you can tell specifically what's different about a role. So if you're giving a supervisor one role and their subordinate another role, you want to make sure you know what you're giving them. But notice when I was there, when I was looking at the role differences, admin isn't anywhere in here. And the admin role is the one that can do everything. And so it's kind of helpful to know what the admin role can do. And that's why I pointed out there's this bundle that you can download that's a custom administrator role. And it essentially takes a snapshot of the administrator role and then allows you to customize it to create the role that you need. There is no way to edit and save the administrator role. So if you load that bundle, then all of a sudden you have access to, you can compare a role to the administrator role. And if you uncheck the only show differences, you're going to see all of the permissions. So let's just look at a role real quick while we're here. I'm going to say manage roles. And notice that all of the ones that they deliver to you out when you first get it, that have the word customize. Now I have created custom ones by when you click on customize, then you give them a name, and we usually put a header on it so you know which ones are the ones that you created. Also, I recommend doing this because then if they make any changes to their roles, you still have the one that you created. So I recommend that you always use these types of roles. And so if you edit a role, you have some options. You can rename it. You can say whether there's employee restrictions on what they can see. I don't want to go in too depth into this, but you can give them access to certain subsidiaries, allow for cross-subsidiary record viewing as opposed to editing. So if you want them to be able to see things in other subsidiaries but not change them. Some roles are required to have a two-factor. Let's see. Here we go. But you can say not required, but if you force a two-factor, you can do that here. But now we get into the meat of the permissions are these 4 sections of transactions, reports, lists, setup, and custom records. And this is where you can say for each of these, what level of access do they have. Note that it doesn't show you everything. It gives you a certain set, but then you can come into this drop down and select what's missing. And then give access at whatever level and the order of those levels are view, create, edit, and full. So full allows you to delete. Edit, you can do everything but delete. Create, you can only create. View, you can only view. So those are your options on that. It can get confusing to know what permission is required for a certain role. So well, there's a couple, let me go back to here. There's a trick where if you're having trouble figuring it out, have someone who's an admin go to what you're trying to do, because there'll be a URL associated with it most of the time, not all of the time. But if they send you that URL and you click on the URL, you'll get an error that'll tell you which permission is needed. It'll say you need the invoice transaction, or it'll tell you, and then you can send that to your administrator and they can easily get to the role you need. There's also an Excel file that NetSuite has in their helps that shows you all of the permissions. I mean, it's a crazy Excel file. It's very long. But if you're the administrator, it wouldn't hurt to take a look at this one. You can find it, you can use this link, but you can also find it in Suite Answers by searching for permission documentation, and that gives you the list of all of the permissions and what they allow you to do. I typically, we see starting out with one role and then doing a save as, and creating a new role from that role and working that way. Any questions on roles? I think we went through it pretty quickly, but it's a pretty in-depth topic as far as getting them right. I just want to make sure to reiterate the importance of that separation of duties, and not having everybody be an administrator. It's a easy trap to fall in when you're in the throes of implementation and you don't want to have any barriers to people being successful in setting things up. But once you stabilize, and preferably before you go live, it's a good time to look at those roles and make sure they're good. Plus, then you can set up those forms and dashboards and things like that specific to the role that makes their job easier. If you're an admin, everything's going to be there for you, and there's no limits. Okay, I don't see any questions on permission.
Dana, I have a quick question. I'm sorry if you mentioned it. Did you mention setting global permissions on the employee record?
I did not.
The possibility of doing that. The only reason I think it's worth mentioning is that if you are publishing dashboards,
Yes.
it makes it a lot easier if you're the admin to set the publishing dashboard as a global permission on your user role. Then no matter what no matter what center you're in based on the role, then you can publish a dashboard from there. But there's other uses for it too.
Yeah. It's
under access and then global permissions.
Global permissions. I've seen this one with like mobile, that you give them the mobile access as a global permission, because then any role they have, they can get that. But yes, you can set things up to be global permissions for any role. And you can do that, I believe you can do that not just at the employee record, you can also do it at a very high level, right? In the setup, I think it's in the setup company general preferences. Am I right, Corey?
I don't know, actually. I've never used that.
I don't think I'm lying. I thought there was one place where you could do global preferences at a company level, so that but I can't remember where it is. You know how everything is in 100 places.
Yeah.
So if we can come up with that before our conversation later, but yes, at an employee level, then you can also give them global permissions. I might be mixed up. It might be at the employee level that you give them. Okay, yes, that's a good one. I did not talk about that one. This is where also, by the way, you give multiple permissions to somebody in this role section. And as an administrator, you may want to have everybody's role so that you can log in as them to see what they see. Okay, it's Cheryl asked, let me go back up and say, let's see, Margie, if you have a global permission on an employee, does it take your or the global permission? It'll take the global permission over the role permission, Margie. So if she's asking what takes precedence, and the employee global will take precedence over the role permission. And then Cheryl asks, is there a way to view what role a person was in when they made a change to a record? I recall that the audit trail just shows the user, but not the role. I'm not sure about that. Anybody know the answer to that?
So you can you can troubleshoot it by looking at the login audit trail. So
sure.
you kind of have to look at it in two different ways. So you look at the record and then the system information on the record and then the timing on that. And then you can look at the login audit trail and see when they logged in and what role they logged in with, and then you can kind of like deduce from there.
Yeah, that's good. So this shows our logins. It's in reversed order. So now you could see who logged in and what role they were in at the time that they logged in. Good. Good question, Cheryl. Good answer, Corey. Teamwork makes the dream work. All right. I've got this thing at the top of the screen that's in my way. Okay, we're going to talk about lists. Lists are fun. Let me go back to let's get here. Okay. You can customize the list view for most record types in NetSuite, and I'm going to pop over there in a minute and show you, but you can update the results to see just the data you need. You can update the order of the columns, update the sort order, so both the column order and then the row order, and then you can add filters at the top to make a list view very dynamic so that you're able to filter it to what you need. This works for most entity and transaction lists, and the sublists also allow for customization. One note on this is that the filters are sticky, so I'll show you what I mean with that. That you want to remember that so that the filter will stay. And this can be problematic on a transaction subtab, I've noted. And so you can also make these customized lists. You can make a saved search available as a list view, and then you can make it the preferred list view for any of the roles. So we get back to this whole idea of making your roles very specific to make someone's job better and easier. So you can make these custom lists work for them. All right, so we're going to hop over into lists. Sorry, there we go. So I'm going to go here. We created a custom list in this database of our motorcycles. They have a fleet of motorcycles. And so this is a custom record that we created, but now I've got a list. And you can see that my view here is the current MRP fleet vehicles. But I could change this to say, okay, but you could create whichever list you want and have it drop down. And I'm going to edit my view right here. And now you can see a criteria and a results tab. So your criteria is just like on a saved search where you can say, I want to see only these. This is a filter that's built in. And then in the results, you can say what fields you care about seeing in the columns, so that you can change the order of them. So whoever's looking at this list might care more about the name of the vehicle or the make or the year. You can move those columns to be wherever it makes the most sense. And then you can also give it a sort order. And one of my favorite things is the available filters on the top. I'm going to say donated, and I'm going to put it in the filter region of this view. And I'm going to say add, and because this is a checkbox, it's not going to show as multi-select, but I could have shown it that way. Now I'm going to say save. And so now when I look at MRP fleet bikes, if I click on this filter, I'm able to say, I only want to see the donated ones. All right. And so you can see how this filter is not the criteria of the report. It's something that you would want the user to be able to change on the face of the view. And that can be really powerful to help them do their job better. And so this then allows you to see the list and save the list as a view that you see all the time. Notice if I were to, let's see, if I were to look at, trying to think of a good, I'm going to go to a vendor, MBA Insurance, for example. Oh, shoot, I've got too many windows open and I can't get to my window because there's a, oh wait, maybe I can move that. There we go, I moved it. Here's my vendor. When you go down here to financial and look at transactions, for example, this is a sticky setting. If I say I only want to see open transactions, the next time I go to view a list of transactions under a vendor, it's only going to show me the open ones, and I'll think, wait, where did all their records go? So make sure that you keep this these filters at the top. Like I said, they're sticky, and so, but notice this is a sublist view. I can customize this view by clicking on the customize view button here to make my job better for seeing what I want to see on this specific view. So I think it's powerful because you don't want to see a bunch of junk that you don't care about. You want to only see the details that are interesting to you. The way to publish those is to create a saved search and then create it as a public saved search so that it, and check that box that say it's a list view, because then people can attach that to their to the view that they're looking at. For example, in the vehicle list, they can say this is my default view, and then you can control what they're seeing too. Most exciting is this inline editing. I really like it. So you'll see this box, see how it has an X. This is a configuration setting, by the way, that someone has to turn on for your account, that you say that you allow inline editing. And once you allow it, you can click on this box, and anything that has a pencil next to it becomes editable right in this screen. So I don't have to edit this record in order to change these particular fields. I can go ahead and change them right here. You'll note that some records don't let you, the headers of transaction you can change, the header, the main line of a transaction, but you can't change the detailed lines. And if you do a saved search that has both the header and the detail lines, you're not going to be able to edit anything. Also, if you do a transaction search and you're pulling up more than one type of transaction, I don't think it lets you. You need to focus it on one transaction type and the header level, and then you'll get these. But a few tricks here. If I wanted to change all three of these to 2018, if I hold my shift key and I change this to 18, it will change them all. Now you're going to watch me change it back because I'll get in trouble. This is live data here, folks. Now it changed them all. So that's one way of quickly updating multiple records at once. And a very scary inline editing thing that you can do also is you can highlight a group of them and come over here and say delete record, and it's a way to do mass deletes through a view. And so it's a nice shortcut, but it's also a little bit dangerous. But if it helps a lot if you accidentally import, let's say 20 records that you say, oops, those weren't right, you can just come out and delete them this way. Let's see if I go to, I'm going to go to this search just to show you what I'm going to edit this search so that you can see what I did here. As I said, I wanted to make it available as a sublist view, and available as a list view. And then I made it public so that other people can use that as their preferred view. And in the roles, you can say, this is where you set it up to say it's their preferred list view. Any questions on lists? I think they can be really powerful for getting right to the data you want to see. Okay. We talked about inline editing. All right, the next one, again, this is a huge shift in what we're talking about, but we're going to talk about the print checks and forms option. And I'm going to switch to a different account to do this because I've got a better. So I'm in a test environment here, and I'll make it bigger. So print checks and forms is, I'll go back here. Maybe we'll start with this. This is where you manage, it's like batching up your printing. Okay, so this is where you can batch up that you want to print some checks, or you want to print vouchers, print invoices, print purchase orders, whatever you want to print. This whole print checks and forms area is for that. So I'm going to go back into NetSuite and show you. It's under transaction, or transactions management. Wait, must be, there it is. Transaction management, print checks and forms, or you could just say checks and forms. These are all the things that you can queue up to print. And this is where you would go to actually send them to your printer. So when you're working on transactions, you're telling it if you want to print it or not. And so I have a sample here of a vendor that I set up that if you edit of the vendor, oh, I didn't really need to edit, but I'll go to preferences. Do you see how I put a preference to send transactions via print? Because I set that up, every time I enter a purchase order for this vendor, it's going to assume that that purchase order needs to be printed. If I checked email here and then I saved a purchase order for this vendor, it would shoot it off. So be very careful. I'm super careful about using that email one because it's helpful because it'll automatically send it, but you need to know that it's going to do it. The minute you save the transaction, it's going to send it to email. Now in the print one, I'm not as worried because it's sending it to a print queue for me. And so if I know that this vendor wants me to print and mail them, hopefully not a purchase order, then I can set up this print one. And so now I've got a purchase order for that vendor. And when I created the purchase order, it automatically checked this box right here to be printed because of that setting that I had back at the vendor. And by the way, this works exactly the same way on the customers. But I said, okay, I want this to be printed. And so now if I go into because I set this up and it hasn't been printed yet, if I go into print checks and forms, I've still got, there we go. Too many windows open. Then I can come here and look at purchase orders. And you'll see that it's sitting there waiting to be printed. You can also allow reprinting. And if I check this box, let's say it's going to show me all of the purchase orders that have been printed in the past. So if I need to reprint one of them, just check that box and now I see all of them. But if you uncheck that box, you'll only see the ones that haven't been printed yet. All right. Now, the other major use for this is the printing checks. And so when you go in, let's see, I think I have a check. Sorry, financial management. There we go. Print checks and forms. I'm gonna go that way. My screen, I think, is too big and it's falling off. So you come in here to print your checks. It'll show you any bank account where you had said that you wanted a check printed. And so I'm going to go ahead and look at Advertising World. I want to show you this. I'm going to go to this vendor, and it was an 8/15 payment, right? So if I look at their transactions, this is, see how the tabs are in weird places, I think. I don't care about subsidiaries. If I were going to customize this form, I would move financial over, and then I would move transactions over, so it's always the first thing that you see. Okay, here's our bill payment that's sitting out there waiting to be paid. I think, let me see if it was the 110, it was the 100,000 one, so it's this one. So just as a reminder, when you go to do a bill payment, there's a to be printed checkbox right here. And right now it's looking like it's check 14, and I think it's because we've got it queued up for that. But once you say to be printed, it sends it over to that list in the print checks. And if you mess up that check and you need to redo it, you can come out to this bill payment and check the box again to say to be printed, and it'll be queued up again. Now, you don't want to do that if a check was actually ruined in the process of doing it. You'll probably want to void it and redo it. But if you did it on plain paper accidentally, you didn't change your checks into put your check stock in, then just come out here and uncheck or recheck the box to be printed, and then it'll send it to the queue again. And then once you're in print checks and you say which checks you want to print, note that this print back to front means does it pull the paper from the highest number check or the lowest number check? And you only have to test it once with your printer, print 3 checks and see which way it does it. If they're not in the proper order, then check this box. Most of the time you don't need to check the box. But now this is going to say your first check number that's available for this account. And then if you say print, you get a PDF of those checks. And this is the little tiny number is the number that should correspond with the check that's printed on your check form, the little number that shows up here. And that's how you can check your if your printer pulls from back to front, or top to bottom or bottom to top. And then this is your PDF that you send to your printer. When you print it, make sure you don't do any scaling, so that if you mark your print options and take off any scaling, you'll be in better shape, because then it'll come out better. But there's a place where you can nudge this if it's not quite right on your check stock. The other, you can print vouchers down here. That's another one that we often see as payment vouchers. If on the bottom of your check it runs off the check stub, this is where you can say, I want to do a payment voucher, so that you can get all of them onto one page. And that's by checking this box right here. You can check this box and it'll send this payment to a payment voucher. So if you have a particular check that you notice, oh, this is going off of it, you can come back and send it to voucher, or you can always send to voucher. Any questions on the print checks and forms? So if the check printout is messed up and you need to reprint a new check, you would need to void the bill payment. You would need to void it if it really messed up, Jennifer, if it really messed up the check number 14 and it's an unusable check, I would say void it, because you need to show that every check number is accounted for. So you void the check and then repay it. But if you accidentally had plain paper in, don't void it, because the check number is still fine. Go in and just recheck the to be printed box, and then you can rerun that check run. Okay, how can you adjust the print size on the remittance form? The document number shows up extremely small. Are you talking about this number right here, Janice? Because this number should be small because it's actually just a double check for you because the check number is going to be printed on your check stock. And so this little 56 is matching the check number 56. But is that what you're talking about, Janice? Document number on the remittance. Is it on the voucher? Yes, but the top two are larger, but at the bottom it's tiny. Let's see. Do you want to unmute? I'm not following what you're asking.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, good. So when it prints out, the document number on the actual check and the first remittance is larger, but the last remittance, which is our copy, it's tiny.
Are
And
you
it
talking
doesn't,
about, this little 56 right here?
yeah,
So the check number itself, right?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Interesting. I've never noticed that because on here it's the same thing.
Yeah, it's very tiny, but the top one prints fine.
That's weird. I have not played with that, but let's, I'm going to make a note of that. And once we go to the open forum, I'm going to look at that. Is that all right? Or maybe Mike or Margie or someone can play around with that in the next minute while we're talking about reporting, and we'll come back to it. I don't have I know there's a way to mess with the fonts, and it's
I've
possible.
tried it all.
Okay. Okay.
I've adjusted them and it doesn't touch any of that, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. It's true that the check print form is probably less customizable than any other form in the system, but you should be able to work, figure that one. We should be able to figure that out. Worst case scenario, you go to the advanced PDF, but I wouldn't recommend it on the check form actually because it's kind of problematic. But
yeah, I've heard that. Okay, yeah, if anybody has any thoughts, that would be great.
okay. So again, that print back to front is important. Check to see that because you might not even know it's happening, but what it might be doing is putting the wrong check number on here based on what actually printed, and that's that print back to front option on the print checks. Okay, we have one more topic, and we have 8 minutes. So thanks everyone for hanging in there. I know this has been kind of long. So reporting options, and this is meant to be a very high level overview. We do typically during the year have a session on reporting, and you saw that we have a Safe Search one in January. And so we go in much more depth into this, but if you're brand new to NetSuite, reporting in NetSuite can be a little bit confusing because we'll talk about a report, we'll talk about a saved search, and now there's the workbooks. And it's like, well, when do you use one? When do you use the other? Oh, Marie, the credit memos, sorry, I'm gonna answer this question, are automatically on the remittance. They show in the voucher form of the remittance. If you're using the standard NetSuite check print, it'll show the credit memos that you applied to the payment. And if you haven't had that experience, it may be that you're using a customized form. I know we struggled with creating a custom form that would properly handle how credit memos apply. If the credit memo applied to the vendor bill completely, then both of them weren't showing up. But out of the box native NetSuite, it should show the credit memo on the remittance. I'm sorry if you're not having that experience, but I just tested that the other day to make sure. Okay, back to reporting. So when to use reports versus safe searches. The reports in the system, they have just hundreds of pre-configured reports, and they use subtotals and hierarchies, and it makes them pretty. So they're pleasing to look at. They usually have a nice format to them. You can control the filter on them and the columns, the order of the columns. You can also control the sort. You can also, with custom report layouts, you can control the rows. And I'm going to get into NetSuite to show you that one, because that one isn't used as often, but it's very powerful. Reports are smart enough to know the signs, the native sign of an account for debits and credits. And so, you know, reports will always look right when you're running like a financial report. It's always going to have your debits and credits right. However, when you're running saved searches, think of them more like a database query. That's what they are. They go straight at the data. They allow you to join tables so that you can pull data from tables that are related, like a customer table related to a transactions for that customer. But they're very literal. They don't fix the signs for you. So if you're running a report that says, show me all of this vendor's bills and show me their vendor credits, it's going to put them both in as positive amounts. And that might not be helpful for you because you want to show the bills less the credits. So you have to manipulate the data and say, I need to take this number and multiply it, you know, make it a negative. And so you have to kind of play around with things like that. They're perfect for when you want flat file results to export or, you know, turn into a pivot table or something like that. They're perfect for that because they really are just flat files. They don't have the subtotals and things like that. When you want to create any of these types of things for NetSuite, KPI dashboards, custom views, custom reminders, email alerts, exception reports, scheduled reports, those all have to be, I think you can schedule reports too, but saved searches are scheduled as well. And so what you kind of have to think about what your main goal is for what data you're trying to get out of the system. And if you can run a standard report and then just customize it to get what you need, that's usually preferable because then you get a nice looking report that you can hand off to somebody and you don't have to format it. But if you need something very specific and it's not meant to be pretty, the saved searches are really powerful because you can do formulas, you can do case statements, you can really go crazy with saved searches. Then there's a newer one, Suite Analytics Workbook. It's, I say the latest and greatest with a question mark because I think we're still getting there, but I did notice that they're adding new things all the time. But this I would describe as more to replace saved searches than the reports. It's more like a query, but it can be prettier, and it allows you to do multi-level joins, which is really important if you're trying to run a saved search and you can't get to the data that you need. You might be able to do it in the Suite Analytics Workbook, and I'll pop in there and show it to you real quickly. We're running out of time, but bottom line is workbooks are still a work in progress, but they do show promise as a replacement for saved searches. But it's not a replacement for financial reports because it does not do debits and credits. And so let's stick to the financial reports. Let's stay looking at, you know, financial reports as part of the reports. So just a few things to note here. This is your reports where you would get to, I'm just going to go to a financial report and do an income statement. I want to show you a couple quick things before we run out of time. When you're in an income statement, obviously you can customize the report, and this is where you would change I'm going to flip to columns first. You can add new columns to the report. You can add different period range types to those columns if you want to do some comparison reporting. You can change the format of them. You can add filters. You can make those filters be on the filter region of the report. You can create your own filters for it and add it to the filter region. You can create new sorts, and then you can also put more options to say who can access this report. Audience is saying who it's available to. If you go to the access, you're bypassing all of the permissions that you've given for that person. Oh, Margie made a good point that it's not a replacement for saved searches since it can't be used for reminders, alerts, and so many other areas. That's a good point, Margie. We'll definitely, until they allow that, saved searches are going to be around for a long time. So good point. But I wanted to show this edit layout real quick in case you've never played with it. It takes a little bit of getting used to and learning how to do it, but if I, in this income row of my report, this is how you change the rows of your report. I could actually say, instead of grouping that by account, I want to group it by department. And so now when I preview this report, instead of seeing all of my income accounts, I'm going to see my income listed by department. And so you're able to change the left side of your report, which you can't do anywhere else except in a financial report and except by using this layout customization. And so you can save these layouts and share them across multiple reports. And you can go crazy and get rid of the entire structure and have specific accounts show up on specific lines, because you can actually create a new section and then filter and sort as you wish. So I think there's a lot of people who don't know that this is out here or how powerful it is, but it does change that left side layout of your report and can be really useful in expanding the reporting capability. So there we are. That was a flyby on the, oh, I should have said, you can go to analytics and get to the workbooks. That's how you get to the workbooks. So you can get to all the workbooks that they have put out here as sample ones are here available for you as a template, and then you can work with them. But this is how you get to that one. And then Save Searches is obviously under Reports, Save Searches, all Save Searches, new. And there you go. I know that was fast. I had to kind of cram that piece in there at the end. But any questions about reports at a very high level? Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And hopefully, even those of you who are veterans of NetSuite maybe took away one or two little tips and tricks to make our lives easier. And I look forward to when we can all meet again together.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dana. That was an amazing presentation. Lots of great information. So we're going to switch into tips and tricks, and that's going to be from Margie. So Margie, if you're ready to jump on in there. And Janice, to answer your question, I'm actually going to talk about that in a minute on how to find this presentation and past presentations. So as soon as Margie's done with those tips and tricks, I'll show you how to find all of the information later on. And
Good morning. Thank you, Dana. That was really good. Even me, a veteran, 18-year user of NetSuite, did learn a couple things too. So thank you very much. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So today I just want to go over some sort of high-level things, information you might be interested in, finding out general account information, what to do if you have a down system, or how to determine if it's something internal or maybe with NetSuite. These are things you probably won't use too often, but when you need to find out some answers, these will be hopefully helpful tips for you. So I'm just going to go over basically 5 things: how to find out what NetSuite modules you're actually licensed for, the number of NetSuite seats that you're licensed for and how many are used, how to identify the active users, because maybe you're getting low on seats and you're going, wow, does everybody really need a seat that is showing up? How to find out when your upgrade dates were. So in other words, you know, you've been having some problems with your system, someone calls you and you're asking, well, when did this problem occur? And then you kind of look at that and go, well, I wonder if this occurred based upon the last upgrade, and if that's where we should be looking at. And what to do when you have a down or slow system. So the first thing I want to look at is what modules do we have? And I'm going to actually show you this. So these are the slides that are going to be posted for you to go back to. Hopefully they'll be posted this week. Basically, you can see what modules you currently are licensed for without having to find the contract and pull that out. So what we do is we go to Setup, Company, View Billing Information. And here, the way you get to that is you go to Setup. So these are for people that actually have permission to use the Setup Manager. So I know the administrators always have that, and depending on whether or not you have permissions based upon your role will depend whether or not you can see this. So you go to Company, and you scroll down to View Billing Information. And here you can see a lot of information, billable components, add-on modules, add-on bundles, provisioning history, component usage. But if you go to add-on modules, this will tell you right away which modules you actually are licensed to use. And you can just scroll down and see that right away. While I'm here, I wasn't really going to talk about that in my tips and tricks, but add-on bundles also. And what's a little bit interesting about this is it's not showing all your bundles. Supposedly, these are bundles that you have purchased or you're licensed for. However, it's not necessarily true because supply chain management, perhaps it used to be that you had to be licensed for it, but nowadays it is free. You can just install it. However, typically, these are supposed to be bundles that you have purchased. If you want to see the bundles that you actually have in your system, that is when you go to customization and Suite Bundler, and you can do the bundle audit trail. No free bundles. I should say those that are free bundles now shouldn't be showing up under that other tab, but there are a couple that do. So here, if you look at the audit trail, you can see what bundles you actually have installed, and you can see that there's a lot of other bundles here that weren't showing in that other list. These are all free bundles, file, drag and drop, etc. The next thing that I wanted to, I don't know if there are any questions on that, but the next thing that I wanted to talk about were answering the question, how many NetSuite seats do we have? So the number of NetSuite seats can be found at that same place that we're at by just going over to this bundle. Let's go back to Setup Manager. And if we look at the first billable components and we drop down to full licensed users, you can see that here, we're actually in the Rocky Mountain NetSuite user group system. You can see that we have 8 licensed and we're using 7. So that's great. You know, we haven't hit our limit, but maybe you're wondering, do we have other licensed users that aren't really using the system that I can release? Maybe this would be 8 and 8, and then I want someone else to have access, and I go, oh gosh, I'm out of seats. Do I really want to purchase another seat? So the answer is, let's go create a safe search. So here's a safe search that I created. As far as you can see when the last login was. So if you look here, I see that we have someone here that used to be our treasurer. She's no longer our treasurer, although during transition periods, we allow, you know, 2 people because one has to train the other, but she hasn't been logged in since 10/4/2019. So I go, oh, okay, so now I can release a seat. So it's a good reminder because, you know, maybe you don't remember always to say, okay, this person should no longer have access. And I wanted to just show the safe search. And if I go into the edit, and I actually have this, all the criteria and the results and everything else showing, so you can actually copy this safe search for yourselves. I have login access is true, the inactive is false, and then I group everything. So it's kind of making a summary report here. So I group the name, the job title, the login access, and then here, this is what's important. I only want to see the last date that they logged in. So I have the login audit trail date and then that is the maximum date, which is the latest date. So going back to here, this is showing you, and this is where you can actually see and recreate this for yourself, what users are active. The next thing that comes up is upgrade dates, because as I mentioned before, you don't know when your last upgrade was. I mean, if you have a current upgrade going on, then it's pretty easy, because if you have an upgrade that's going to happen or is about to happen, you can just go to your home page, and in this new release section, it'll show you that information. But you see there's no new release coming soon, so it's empty. So the way that you would go about finding out when your releases happen, because it could be that people are having problems and you're trying to figure out when that problem and correlate it with a date of an upgrade, is you go back to this setup manager, and instead of viewing the billing information, you want to go to administrative notices. And under administrative notices, there's information that tells you, what kind of notices you'll receive. And then you want to go to the confirmed button. And on the confirmed button, you're going to have to sort. You're going to have to sort by multiple ways. First, you want to sort by the date confirmed, so you get the latest date. And by the way, you cannot export these, and you cannot create a saved search to access this information, unfortunately. And you notice that there are 423 records. So the first thing you do is that you'd want to sort by date confirmed, because you can see these go back to 2010. And then the next thing is that you'd want to sort by notification type, because what you care about is the administrative notifications. So you can see here that that you want to look at service. You want to look in particular at service release notifications. So here you can see when the upgrade occurred. So it's going to occur on April 17th. But notice something here. If you have multiple administrators and they're all getting notifications, you're going to be seeing a lot of notifications for the same exact email. So say you see when your last upgrade happened, but you want to find out when the prior upgrade to that. So then you would just do in your browser, do a Control F, and from there you would say, I want to know when 2019.2 was upgraded, and then you'd go right away to your service notification release on that, and you could see that that date was October 18th, 2019. Now, if you really want to keep track of these, I would probably create a custom record and just make sure that your administrator updates it there. And then you can do a saved search, you can do lists, and you can allow it to be seen publicly if you wish. The next thing that I wanted to show is, which is really the last thing, is what happens if you have unusual performance issues. Let's say you're having a down system. I mean, you're getting incredibly slow performance. You're going, is it inside our network? Is it NetSuite? You're trying to figure that out. So there is this page you can go to called status.netsuite.com. And it'll show you, as you see here, all the different areas, what data center you might be in the West, Northwest, Central, in Europe, etc. However, it used to be very easy to know which system you were in, because there was a suite answers that said, if your URL starts with, has NA1 or NA2, you're in this data center. However, within the last year, when we switched and we no longer show that in the URL, there is only one way or two ways to find out which data center you're in. You must ask your account manager or your VAR for your data center location. And if you call support, they'll say, we can't give you that information. So you don't want to wait till there's blood on the streets and you're in that emergency situation trying to figure out where the problem is, you want to find out ahead of time. So I'd recommend, sometime in the next month, contacting them and your AM or your VAR to find out that information. So as far as your sandbox or your release preview, it used to be in the West, but it's still, that has changed. So I don't know where your release preview or sandbox is. I can't answer that question. You can look at Suite Answers 10040 for more details. I do want to show this now over here. Let me find that. So here we are live. And just so you know, I used to be in the West. Now I'm actually in the East. So just because you used to know where you were, you are not necessarily there any longer. So I'm now in Boston, is what I've been told. And you can see here that there is actually, it gives you, if this is empty, there's no recent post, it means that there has been no interruption, and you probably have to look elsewhere for where your problem was, maybe within your internal network. But as far as this, it's showing what the last event, what occurred, and that it was resolved. If it's a current problem, it usually give you an estimated time that it'll be up. Well, so here's that information, and you can see all about that, and you can read what each one of these means in that Suite Answers. However, that doesn't really help you if you're actually in that situation at the time. So as I've said here, and this is thanks to Mike Cakelin, if you actually go here to anywhere in your account and you actually type in script debugger, you will actually find yourself here, and you will be transferred to another, hopefully another data center, because it's sort of a different place, and it might resolve your issues, at least that you're currently experiencing. Now, it's possible that the script debugger, I'm not positive about this, but it's possible that script debugger could be in the same data center, but most likely it is not. So Mike, if you know if there's any chance that that's in the same data center, please chirp in here since you provided this great information. So you're actually going to go, what, Mike?
I would say, Margie, yeah, I've never seen this fail, let's put it that way. So if you're having issues with performance, go in here. I've never seen it not work afterwards.
Great, thank you, Mike. So if you click here, and you'll be now into a different URL, you'll see it's a debugger, and you're going, well, what the heck is this? Ignore this. Unless you're a scripter, this is to be ignored. And you can just go to your home page, and any changes you make here it's just like you're working in your production system. So those are the tips and tricks that I wanted to provide to you today. Hopefully you will be able to use this. And let's see, I have a question here. Can you show what you searched again? I tried it and didn't get to the same screen. What you searched again. Oh, script debugger. Yeah, that's up here. Script debugger. Except now that I'm already in it, let me go back to my other system. And let me get out of this. Let's see. Mike, how do I get out of this?
I think you may need to log out, log in. I don't.
Oh, okay. But basically, you just type script debugger. And that'll get you there. That's how you do it.
And you have to be in an admin.
Yes, you have to be in an admin role or have the right permissions. So, are there any other questions about this or any of these little tips that I've provided today? Okay, well, I think at this point I can pass it over back to Corey or whoever is going to be doing our moderator for the open forum.
Margie?
Yes?
Hey, this is Mike. Hey, can you show folks how, so you showed people how to see how many licenses are being used, but since this is kind of a basics meeting, can you show them an employee record, the give access checkbox, and how that is what you actually use to use a license?
Sure, absolutely. Let me go over to here. If I go to an employee record, I'll just go to my own. And if I go over to access, you can see the give access. So like if I actually go to Mariah, we can actually change hers right now, and then you'll see that that will change. Going to the access tab. Seems like the debugger one is a little slower. Okay, I'm going to take away the access. Is that what you're talking about, Mike?
Yes. Yeah, so it's just important for people to know that this, like, you know, you buy a certain number of licenses for people. So if you run out of licenses and you just want to know how to free up a license, this is how to do it.
Okay, and now if we go back to set up company, instead of going into that, I'm going to go right into view billing information. And you should now see that, yes, it's changed to 6. Before we had 7, now we have 6. So we freed that up. Thank you, Mike. I should have showed that. So thank you. Are there any other questions before we move on? Okay.
Sounds good. Awesome.
Thank you very much for your